Morning, everyone. We've got all of our panellists ready to go. So I'm just going to do a quick intro and talk a little bit about what this session's going to be covering. So the session title is Building Creative Ecologies for Smarter Cities. And we're deliberately coming straight in from Dan's talk to cover in a little bit more detail some of the areas that Dan's talked about today. So we've got 4 really different stories and really different experiences on how we grow cultures of innovation. So I'm delighted to welcome Marcus Garcia from Medialab Prado, we're not running in order, but yeah, excuse us. Doug Ward from TechHub, our own Drew from FutureEverything, and Clare Reddington from iShed. Drew, do you want to kick off with some intros?
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Lou. So in this session, we've designed this in part to respond to some of the ideas that Dan's been introducing. One of those key ideas is that when thinking of cities as creative spaces, and when thinking of the introduction of new infrastructures, new environments, we need a shift away from a sort of a top-down management or IT infrastructure approach. That's often the starting point for governments and big companies. And Dan's introduced the idea of the smart citizen. Another key dimension in there is how you nurture more bottom-up creative ecologies that are sustainable, that are scalable. And I'm going to introduce some ideas and sort of set this session up. And we've really got 3 people here who are really doing that on the front line, who are each running projects that are developing really significant creative ecosystems, creative ecologies. And so in a sense, we're going to look now at actually people who are doing some of this work on the front line. So first of all, taking on that kind of the traditional approach, certainly if you're developing infrastructure and technology or any kind of infrastructure, certainly if you think of traditional infrastructure, mention road networks, for example, this stuff is big, heavy. It takes, millions of pounds or dollars or yen to develop. It takes many, many years. And when you're talking about critical infrastructure, it needs, you normally think of it needing to be locked down. And the way that that's traditionally done is in a very linear way. It's designed, it's planned, it's implemented, and it's rolled out. And what we've seen over recent years is an awareness that approach doesn't really work very well in a sort of a networked ecology, in a kind of creative digital society and economy. And actually that you need to work in a different way. You need to actually enable and sustain bottom-up processes. And actually what's happened is that those bottom-up processes are happening and they're really driving the big significant shifts. An interesting thing is, so we're used to, probably everyone in this room, very much used to digital culture, digital economy, and we see the speed at which things develop and how agile things are. And what's kind of interesting is when that collides with that old, heavy infrastructure world. How can we build big infrastructure in a more agile way? How can we hack cities? Where's the critical infrastructure? Where can you give people access to play, and where would you not want that to happen? So you've got those kind of debates happening in the background. And then when we're talking about creative ecologies, these aren't new debates. For example, there's ideas of the creative city introduced in the 80s by Charles Landry. And this was a focus on creative, the idea of the creative class, creatives, creative people as real drivers in cities. And that's been a very, very key concept in city development around the world. But I would argue that it's actually become quite problematic. It's driven a lot of, for example, culture-led regeneration, the idea, let's bring the cool kids in. Let's bring the startups in, the creative kids, and our city will strive, go forward. But what normally happens is gentrification, and then those artists and creatives can't afford to live there. So that kind of idea and concepts kind of hits some issues. There's also a lot of work around sort of clusters, digital clusters, how you can sustain business ecosystems, how you can create an environment where businesses, artists feed off each other, and that can kind of become sustainable. And then for FutureEverything, for me, and I'm sure for other people here, another big shift is open source. If we're looking at how people collaborate now, where would you look? What are the kind of real exemplars? Well, you might point to GitHub, for example. So, GitHub is a repository, a code repository, open source code repository, and around that, a community of practice has developed, where people collaborate online, they share code online, and this is a completely different paradigm, a huge paradigm shift. Those people can be collaborating from anywhere in the world. So how do we map that on to physical places, to cities, to neighborhoods? Is that significant? Do we need to think in terms of places and neighborhoods and the like? And then also, certainly from my experience and for FutureEverything, it's also being able to tap into that very global community, to be able to go to other events or have people come here, and it really is a community, and people collaborate and work together, and have meetups at events like this, or just regular meetups in every city on the planet, and that kind of coming together of people is a key driver. And the final point for me, which is kind of to leave on something of a story of a project. So the work I do, the work that FutureEverything does in the festival, but year-round as well, it's very much grappling with these kinds of issues. And to give one example, so FutureEverything's been very involved in open data. In 2009, coming out of an edition of the festival and the conference, there's a workshop, and a proposition emerged. How would Manchester evolve if it was an open data city? And we thought, well, how are we going to question that? How are we going to explore that idea? Well, let's do it. Let's turn Manchester into an open data city. So we took that on, probably foolishly. Mainly me and Julian Tate. I'm not sure if he's here. He's probably upstairs with the EU open data delegates. And we took this project on. And this became a really interesting experiment in participatory policy and participatory infrastructure. So we worked by developing a community. So a group was established, Open Data Manchester, a group of coders and businesses that 3 years later still meets very regularly, still very active. And we also engaged all of the people on different parts of the chain in the network. So the executive, the policy makers, but also the people who manage the data, the listserv managers in the local authorities, in agencies like Transport for Greater Manchester. And the key thing is to lead that change, that new infrastructure, that policy. It couldn't be an idea that's rolled out linearly. We had to engage every point in the ecosystem at the same time as building that ecosystem. My background's art and I'm a curator, and I understood that as curating an environment for change. And the key thing in there, we learned a number of things. We learned about the role of neutral intermediaries, because FutureEverything, it led to to Data GM, the Greater Manchester Data Store. It's the first municipal data store to have been set up by an independent agency rather than the mayor's office. And we learned a number of sort of take-homes from that. The role of neutral intermediaries is really important because it can take the risk away. A local authority might be nervous about doing this, but if they can point at us, those kids over there doing it, then they can take those steps. Another was about how to create the connectivity. An idea we came up with the importance of vertical connectivity. You had to create the spaces where the developers and activists could meet the city leaders, where they, and industry leaders, where different people from different spaces could come together. So we found a number of key things. And one of the findings to conclude is that those roles of intermediaries is really significant. In other sessions in the conference, we're going to talk about platforms, new platforms like Vimeo, Creators Project, Kickstarter, and how they're completely changing the media landscape. So there's a long word, which I didn't allow us to use as a title, disintermediation. Any words with that many syllables shouldn't be used in a conference program booklet. But that's basically the idea that the traditional intermediaries are no longer, well, certainly the sole custodians of ideas, or the sole channels by which we experience things. But you then see the rise of these new intermediaries that operate in a totally different way, that are kind of network culture, that have emerged from network culture. So, Kickstarter and that's, an instance there. But I would say that on this table, you've got other kinds of new intermediaries, organizations that are concerned with building these creative ecosystems, these creative bottom-up ecologies, where some of the real challenges is how you can design this, but also make it co-design, how you can make it bottom-up and collaborative. So that's it from me. I'm now going to hand over to Claire to talk about one of those case studies.
Hello, can I have my slides up, please? Marvelous. Hi, I'm Clare Reddington. I'm from Watershed in Bristol, and Watershed was one of the first media centres in the UK. And I'm going to talk about the kind of the sort of shared and open ecology that we've built around Watershed in the last probably 10 years. I don't really like the term bottom up. I think it has a sort of a kind of value to it on the bottom bit doesn't really appeal to me. And I'm also aware that I sit between kind of art and culture and technology and policy making and now academia. So if I use nonsense words, I suggest that you raise your hand and challenge me and heckle me on it. But really I'm going to talk about practical things of how we've done what we've done and what the things we're struggling with at the moment are. Because Dan and Drew have brilliantly set up the conceptual space for us and kind of opened up where the challenges are. I would also say I also don't like the term smart city, and if I get time, I'll tell you a little bit about Playable Cities, which is the award that we launched this year around making the city more playful spaces. My slides are just rolling pictures of some of the projects and the things that we've commissioned and supported over the last couple of years, and they all say what they are, so you can Google them and have a look. So this is the Pervasive Media Studio. It's part of Watershed, and it's in Bristol in the southwest of the UK. We set it up 5 years ago because we were continually doing projects which brought together different types of people, which brought together technology companies, audiences, artists, creatives, and we were bored of doing projects. We kept losing the wisdom. We'd spike and we'd do something brilliant, and then all of that skills and enthusiasm would dissipate. So we wanted a physical space where we could bring people together. So we have 40 desks, and we're right in the city centre. We have events and meeting space, and people apply to come in, and our job is to curate the mix of people who come in. Drew used the curation word. It's a really important one. So at the moment, we have games designers, we have craft makers, we have someone who's designing lunar landers, which we'll all be able to buy on Kickstarter to send our own sensors to the moon. We have a circus collective, we have a record label, huge different people. We have commercial and cultural ideas within the mix. And mostly the idea is people don't know which one of those they are when they come in. Our job is to get rid of that bit of their thinking and to let them open up, to play with their ideas, crucially to get them used and applied and tested, and then we help them think about what the value of their idea might be. So for us, we use the term keeping the money at the margins, and that's how I think a kind of an ecology flourishes. If you get rid of money as the most important currency, then we can talk about generosity, curiosity, ideas, and stories. So why we do this, we were quite influenced by a guy called John Seeley Brown, who wrote a thing called Creation Nets in Harvard some years ago now. And he wrote that to deliver new ideas and innovation to the market, whichever market you're talking about, you need to collaborate with people who are not like you. You need to find people who are different to you culturally, in terms of what you're trying to achieve, in terms of skill sets, ethnicity, age. They just need to be different to you. And then you need these intermediaries, the creation nets, he calls them, that helps make that playing field equal. So in the studio, we work with councils, with tech companies, with individuals, with audiences, users, however we're going to describe them today. And we make sure that everybody is on an equal footing. So we're interested in new work that uses digital technologies to explore the ways we live, the changes to our cities. We're interested in talent development, in enabling artists and producers and technologists to use new tools. We're interested in something that one of our technologists, Tim Kimberg, calls the unreasonable expectations of artists, which means that if you invite people in who are not going to accept what the affordances of those technologies are, how they've been specified by the tech company, then they'll do incredible things and find new uses for those technologies. We're interested in new types of performance or experience or apps which make audiences the co-collaborators, which allow people to author their own experiences. And lately, we're interested in something called knowledge exchange. So last year, Watershed applied with the University of Cardiff, Exeter, Bristol, UWE and Bath to become one of Arts and Humanities Research Council's knowledge exchange hubs, which basically means that we've got £5 million along with 3 other hubs. So there's one in London, there's one here that sponsored this festival, which Drew's very involved in, and one in Dundee. And we've got £5 million to support brilliant projects which take academics and creatives and allow them to collaborate on an equal footing, to get away from a kind of transactional idea of collaboration and to make stuff where people are equal and are applying their ideas equally. And then we help them find the value in those ideas. So far, we've launched a project called Heritage Sandbox, which is completed. We funded 6 collaborations looking at the future of heritage. And we are in the middle of the very brilliant Books and Print Sandbox. If you're interested in the future of publishing at all, Google it, because the projects that we're working on at the moment kind of floor me and leave me in awe every day with how rigorous their exploration and how much this collaboration offers these projects in this area. So that's kind of some of the context of what we do. And Drew asked me to talk practically about how we curate and make healthy and flourishing ecosystems. So for me, it starts with space. It's about co-location. It's allowing people to find their own extraordinary serendipitous projects because they're sitting next to each other, because they're making cups of tea together. It's about having this shared wisdom which enables you to build things faster rather than making something, publicizing it, and letting it dissipate. There's something that I think that we don't fully understand around trusting our producers' hunches in this area and how we select and support people. Venture capitalists talk about it a lot. They tend not to invest in ideas. They invest in people. They invest in people who are passionate and generous and driven. And I think that we as a sector need to identify and support more our producers' hunch, because you can spot what's going to make a good collaboration and you can spot somebody who's going to make brilliant things happen in the world. It's really important that... Sector, yeah, that's right. There's loads of them. I guess I'm talking about people working in creative and digital things. Does that help? Maybe the cultural sector is the one that I was talking about, and the academic sector when I said that we're not so good at trusting producers' hunches. I'll get to that as a challenge later as to something that I think we do need to explore. I think it's really important that people know why you value them and why you want to work with them. I don't think that generally anybody is very great at saying, I gave this person some time, some money, some attention, a place in the program because they did this really brilliant thing. And that helps the collaboration move forward because it helps them know why you've invited them to play in this space. It also helps if you're willing to commit to these places, to these communities for really long periods of time. These ways of working don't pay off quickly. You need to trust that the results will happen, but you also need to let them meander, was the word today. Let them meander and find their space in the world before we force it. So we need to create spaces and places for people to just be, to share their thinking, their questions, and their learning. So for us, that's a mixture of meetups, it's a mixture of blogs, so everything is blogged openly, all the learning is shared. It's Basecamp, but it's also about editorializing some of those learnings. It's about finding kind of pathways in online for the stuff that people's learned. Not everybody wants to read kind of 400 blog articles about a new books and print project, but we can kind of be a pathway into that. I think it's really important that we understand what stake we want in the projects that we're supporting and funding and what conversation we want to have with them. People always wonder why we don't take a financial stake in the projects that we support. And it's because I think there's probably a more interesting conversation to have with those projects than, can you give me my money back, please? Or how much are you going to make for me? By keeping the money at the margins of our space, by making every desk in our space free, anybody can come in, anybody can play, and I can have conversations with them about ideas, about what they think is coming next, and I can be led by their energy into developing new support mechanisms. We've got to focus on the journey, focus on the exploration, share the excitement of the journey, and not focus on the results. Free people up to share their best bits and not to worry about failure. Although I think tech conferences like this often fetishize failure, and I'm often asked to stand up and go, and a little bit like Dan, talk about my 5 biggest failures, and I struggle a little bit, because if you're not predefining the outputs, then it's very hard to describe something as a failure, because usually it's found a way to be in the world, or found a different thing to be in the world, which you wouldn't necessarily count as rubbish. The changes or the challenges then that we face at the moment, if those are some of the things that we've learned about making a space like the Pervasive Media Studio, is around organizational culture. It's around creating gearing mechanisms to be these intermediaries where you can negotiate the different timescales, the different ways of thinking about things like risk and investment. Ooh. That means I'm done, but I'm just going to finish up. It's also about the dark matter. These are really, really big challenges, especially when you're working with universities. There's problems around bureaucracy. I imagine many of us who've worked in the university sector have paid someone out of our own bank accounts because it got to the point where it was too embarrassing to leave it any longer. But also the thing I really learned with React was that we put in this application which said we're going to change the culture of universities. And actually the universities didn't really ask. The people working in the admin offices and in the finance offices of universities weren't involved in that process. It wasn't a bottom-up funding application. So we have to remember that not everybody is bought into culture change, and we need to be empathetic to that. For me, we need to find better ways of funding projects which value hunches, intuition, and curation, and get away from things like peer review and kind of spreadsheets and box-ticking exercises, because I don't think that works. And I think the really interesting conversation for us is around legacy. Is this a thing that should exist forever? When do we kill it? When do we become the outmoded institution? When should we be setting up the next skunk works or the next kind of grit in the mill? I've got into bed with the big boys. We're a tiny organisation working with some very big universities. What will that do to our institutional culture? And what do we need to do to preserve our value within that collaboration? So some thoughts and some questions. Thank you.
Morning. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, cool. So true to form, being a bit rebellious, I haven't brought any slides with me, but I think that's important that I'm going to talk about a brief story that highlights what we're doing in Manchester with TechHub, and I'm going to talk about a startup that I had called Night World, a big failure, inspired by US mentality of tech clusters, and something called the Boulder Thesis, which I think is really important to push that message out there. So, first of all, bear with me. I am a tech entrepreneur. I have ambitions to create one of the biggest technology startups in Britain with my business partner, Sean Gibson, who's in the crowd today. 4-5 years ago, we set off on the journey of creating a technology business in the UK, and we were told that we were crazy and that we should probably go to America. From there, we ended up building a technology platform in Australia, and we raised £420,000, which for a lad from humble beginnings was an astronomical sum, and completely failed. We lost our apartment, cars, girlfriends at the time had gone, and we ended up on our parents' couches. At that moment in time, I realized the big cultural difference globally compared to what is in the UK. My friends had labelled me a loser by that moment when I was hundreds of thousands of pounds in debt, and my friends in America were celebrating my failure and really excited to see what I was going to do next, along with Sean. So after spending many months on a couch studying the same courses that Harvard students were doing, I was doing computer science online, we got to a level of competency where we could create websites and building applications, and decided where was the best place to build a technology startup. Now, I should say that I don't know how many people here are familiar with the tech community, because I can only speak from a tech standpoint, but the culture typically is in America, they talk about building companies, they have a much bigger domestic community, so they think naturally bigger, and their investors think about international businesses, whereas there's typically a culture in Europe about exiting and retiring to the south of France and having a property empire. So we were in a real position of whether we should just completely dismiss the UK to start with. So the reason why I'm telling you this is because I think with technological clusters, the first thing that has to be addressed is why be based in the location that you're deciding to create what you're intending to do. The world has changed. Gone are the days, I believe, of hierarchies. I think they're soon to come to an end. I think we're moving into a world of a meritocracy and the network effect. If you think historically, hierarchies were built to be more efficient, in the factories, etc. Whereas nowadays, I'm a big believer of fertile, the most fertile innovation ground is collaborating with others and building your network. Anyway, so bringing you back to the mother's couch. So from that point, we decided there was a map of London showing what was happening in a tech cluster in London that was identified by something called Tech City Map, but there was nothing for the rest of Britain. And we created something called Tech Britain, created a map showing the people, companies, finance, and spaces. Why did we do that? Because we wanted to highlight the great talent outside of London, and also highlight the message that you can do technology businesses now from your bedroom. You don't have to particularly be in a cluster. So we proceeded to travel around the country, interviewing computer scientists, meetups, event organizers, recommended startups, tech journalists, VCs, and ended up getting the support of the government. And I'm happy to say that it's about to be promoted worldwide. But from the mother's couch, we were inspired by something called the Boulder Thesis. What is the Boulder Thesis? But in Boulder, Colorado, with a population size of around 100,000, they have one of the most dense entrepreneurial activities in the world. They believe that this is due to the Boulder Thesis, which comprises of 4 points. One, that leaders must be entrepreneurs. 2, that the entrepreneurs should take a 20-year plus standpoint. Thirdly, that they should embrace everybody who wants to get engaged to create a critical mass of network effect. And 4, that there should be a continuous events to engage the whole entrepreneurial stack. So I should say, about touching upon the power of entrepreneurs with the current economic climate, I think it's very, very important that entrepreneurs are supported, given the economic input they can have for the local community. But I think before even supporting the entrepreneur, the thing that the Boulder Thesis highlights is the combination of leaders and feeders. So feeders would be councils and universities and service institutions. We've seen around the world with people trying to create technological clusters being led by feeders, that there has been a build it and they will come approach. One thing that really needs to be understood is that entrepreneurs now with these skill sets can be based anywhere in the world. So we're seeing a lot of UK talent leaving and going to wherever they want, such as San Francisco, New York, Shanghai. There's an initiative called Startup Chile, where entrepreneurs are being given 40,000 euros matched, and that's created 1,000 startups by 2014 relocating to Chile. So I should say that, just looking at my notes, bear with me. Why am I doing what I'm doing? So having toured around the UK and seen the great talent we have in the country, I was inspired to stay in the UK first of all, and then secondly be based in Manchester. Because one thing we do have here is we have a history of world-class innovation, a great university, a great creative community in the city, as well as great computer scientists and some great entrepreneurs. So at TechHub, we have a technical co-working space, which is highly vetted. We say no to 70% of our applicants as of check-in this morning. And we want to be the place for the best technology startups in Britain. So tonight we have Google coming from Paris, it's part of the FutureEverything conference, but we've had VCs from London come up. We have Microsoft coming this year, Amazon, and it's led by a young entrepreneur who tells people to take their suits off. It's not a place for lawyers or accountants. It's the idea at TechHub is that you have to be happy. The power of being happy now, I think, is starting to come out in data. Also, you have to be very serious, and we also expect people to grow out of TechHub. It's not a place for people to stay there for life. So we ask people to leave if we don't think they're growing. So we've had 8 companies just last week relocate from London that are all VC backed. We have all the technical co-working, technical meetups that are moving to TechHub now. And every Friday we have something called Tech Base and Beers, which you're all welcome to. It's part of building on the build, using things that we've seen around the world, such as the Boulder Thesis, the needing a series amount of events to engage the design community and the creative community with the developer community and the business community. So Tech Base and Beers is free beer every Friday in a different bar in the Northern Quarter. And we've got tech skydiving this summer and crazy things like that. We've got a bike ride from Google campus in London to Manchester. So TechHub is an international network of hubs. So there's currently tech hubs in Romania, Bucharest, in Riga, in Latvia, and also in London, Google campus, where the government have labelled it Tech City. So I really want you to ask me some questions, because I know I've mumbled my way through without slides. But I think it's important to say that for Manchester to become a European startup destination, the feeders, the council, and the institutions in Manchester need to really be letting young entrepreneurs lead the way, because we are in a new world. And just to end with, the mentality of giving to receiving. I think that's a new philosophy, and people sometimes think it's a zero-sum game or we're competing with each other. But what we have seen in TechHub Manchester is companies that are collaborating on the basis they're willing to help you. Or if you ask somebody at TechHub for help, they will help you. And just by that very mentality, there is a network effect in TechHub that's very fast. And also the learning process has been accelerated. I'd like to ask any questions. Be more than happy to help. Thank you.
Well, hello. Well, I have to say that today is a great day because after waiting for a very long time, more than 3 years, Medialab Prado is going to move to a new building, and also mill now transformed into a Medialab. And actually, I want to dedicate this talk to my colleagues that are working on the move. I am here, so yeah. I'm very happy to be here, and well, here, okay. So I can't see my slides. Well, I have a lot of slides. Actually, my presentation tries to respond to the context that has been perfectly described by Dan Hill. So what we propose at Medialab Prado is how we can manage to build an institution, a cultural institution that actually responds to the needs of the present. So the first part of my talk was about, or is about, trying to describe the main features of this moment and how we can face it. I will try to do it very quickly. So we can describe the present as a kind of new digital disorder, and the way we used to organize the world with certain categories that we use them as opposites, now it's not very useful for the kind of moment that we are living in. So we can see like maybe 3 main features that respond to this new digital disorder. We live in a read and write culture, so this division between producers and consumers or issuers and recipients is no longer very useful. There are new ways of organizing knowledge, or maybe disorganizing knowledge, and this make very interesting connections that didn't happen before. And also new practices are happening, online practices, but also presential practices that are changing the ways that we are living together, and I think it is these ideas may lead us to design new models of institutions, because the institutions that we have inherited respond more to this kind of divisions. So I go through quickly some examples. I like to put examples about this idea of read and write culture. Harold McGee blog. He likes experimenting with food and cooking, and he growed some white beetroots in his garden and tried to make crystals of sugar. This is the result, but the interesting thing is that he shared the experiment from a scientific point of view, and again, this failure can be really useful for others. A lot of new groups and communities are formed by sharing projects, sharing techniques, sharing recipes. One thing that I think that we've witnessed during the last 20 years, and we have confirmed that humans have the need of doing things and sharing what they do with others and sharing the techniques. And this process allows to create new communities. So another example, the knitting communities There's knitting maths, bio knitting, psycho knitting. So many people are knitting little puppets, dog puppets, knitting for the dog, even knitting with their hare's dog. There are also communities that are not only concerned about exchanging different contents, but also they are aware of the infrastructures, the legal aspects that make this the platforms that they inhabit. We have the new digital commons, like Wikipedia, free software, the internet as a commons. So this idea of self-managing a resource and create rules to manage this resource and make it sustainable through time, it's quite crucial, I think. So I would like to propose you to make this route from digital commons to new urban commons, and how digital commons may connect with presential space and the physical space. I'll do it very quickly. So we have Arduino and physical computing, and it is not only about a device that has spread the use of electronics to new prototypes, but a community around it that is growing all the time by sharing knowledge and practices. There's 3D printers that the RepRap project that allows any user to see the software, the design, and the hardware, and they can modify it and make new models. And that's why this project, these machines are called Darwin and then Mendel, the last one. They evolve through time. There's this idea of a viral way of building together and sharing the new designs and making the projects bigger. I want to talk about this project in Spain using the RepRap as a bank of pieces, and machines. These RepRap machines are self-replicating and can produce the pieces needed to build a new machine. So people are exchanging pieces, and you can see here the Clone Wars family tree. So you can see the outcomes of the different machines. There's infrastructures, citizen-driven infrastructures to generate data, share data, and manage this data. We have OpenStreetMaps, geographical data that also in a way shape our cities, or Usahidi, people witnessing and telling things about their city, about what is happening in the city, and adding this layer of information that is happening through time. We have open space technologies, new ways of meeting and organizing activities where there is not so clear distinction between speakers and the audience. Anyone can become a contributor. There are wiki sprints or book sprints where people gather to write books together, or hackathons where people get together to make things together. And the last example of how the digital technologies are affecting the way we are living cities is the Occupy movement, and how unexpectedly in Madrid, a whole city was prototyped within the main square of Madrid. So that was a real citizen lab, and I want to talk about citizen labs, which may be the kind of institutions that respond to this context that I was talking about. So everybody, all the organizations want to have a lab, because there's a need of experimentation, but also the need of experimenting new modes of organization. So we have schools that offer a model of learning by doing projects, libraries that are transformed into maker spaces, or even churches makerspace. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Medialab Prado. That's where I work, and this is a City Halls project. It's a public project, and it tries to be a platform where people can meet to do projects together. And the idea is that anyone can participate in the experimentation and production process. And I'll tell you later how. So it is an open space that works as a place for prototyping, but also exhibiting. And at the same time, there are always seminars, and this happens at the same space. Actually, this is the oldest space, and now we're moving to a new one. I'll show some images later. So the idea is to define the lab as an infrastructure. It is very important to offer an infrastructure, a permanent infrastructure, but it's more important that there is a community built around it, and the operative system that allows this community to actually experiment and do projects together. So besides the idea of learning by doing, we like the idea of building community by doing projects together, and do it in public. What kind of projects? We'd like to talk about prototypes. This is the first stage when an idea gets materialized. And there are many, many examples of projects that have been done. Some of them have a more artistic approach. Others have a more activist or scientific or educational approach. The idea is that some of them are experimental video games, interactive installation. There are groups that are translating books into Spanish. There are many projects. I'll talk about the operative system very quickly. It's very simple. One can participate as a promoter of a project or as a collaborator in other person's project. We have different formats in order to organize, to host this kind of workshops and this kind of production. There are open labs, there are international production workshops on interactive design, visualizing data visualization, actually run by José Luis de Vicente, who's here, and many different types of activity that allow this. I would like to mention that the next one is going to happen soon in Madrid, the 10th of April. There's the Librographics meeting, and there's this workshop titled Tools for a Read and Write World, and you're all invited. It will be the opening of the new building. And part of the operative system has to do with this operation of cultural mediation. So how to make the whole process hospitable. This is the operation of listening to the different needs of the visitors or the users that are coming in, telling them what is going on, and connect them with the projects that may be of their interest. So the whole idea, the whole operative system is how we may allow users become contributors, become collaborators or promoters of projects. It is really important to leave space for the unexpected. So participants propose mini workshops. There are some activities outside the Medialab. And of course, we party a lot. These are cañas. This is a very small size of beer we have, but it never gets warm in Madrid. And this is a very important moment, because maybe the most important moment, because that's when people get together and think of new projects that are beyond the prototypes that are developed at the lab. So it can be also a giant spaghetti. These party moments allow participants to think of new projects, maybe a makerspace, maybe a company, maybe an online platform. And this is like externality. This is not directly searched, but it happens. And I think this is what is important. Of course, documentation is really important, so the whole projects and the workshops themselves are replicable. Some of the participants replicate this model of workshops that we have, production workshops in other parts of the world. The last one was in Invention in Brazil, in the forest with very little internet connection. And now I have 2 minutes to talk about the perils when thinking of the move to the new building. Some of our are perils and some of are maybe opportunities. The first one is the scale. What is the scales? What can be the scale of a citizen lab? So this is the Medialab for the last 5 years or 6 years. It was only 150 square meters. Now we're moving to a much bigger building. This also mill that has been just renewed, and it's more than 2,000 square meters. So we are trying to respond to this situation by offering an infrastructure of workstation or labs, to build a lab of labs that really offers an infrastructure for production. So we have a food lab, there is a software lab, there is hardware and open design lab, digital fabrication, there is legal lab, there is open publishing lab, Librographics lab, data culture lab. So the idea is to make some places that at the same time work as exhibiting spaces but as experimenting as labs, and have this in a permanent way that allows participants to develop their projects. Another question is the budget. Now the budget has been reduced a lot, so there isn't a budget for activities. But what we are doing is offering the space for the different projects in order to help us to build these labs, and then they offer activities for introduction, so new public may join. I have to finish now, so I will quickly through this. This is very important. I want you to see this. And the last thing, I want to mention this because there is a delicate balance between voluntary work and precarity. So, I think public institutions have to be concerned about this. So, voluntary work is able when there is autonomy for users to really develop their own projects, not to do cheap labor for the government, like, I don't know, putting books in the shelves, because some governments want voluntary work for not covering like jobs that should be paid labor. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, so we're running a few minutes late, but I want to have some time for some questions and some discussion. So we've got some roving mics, these lovely people along the side. Could I maybe see if there are any questions and maybe take a couple at once, just so we can get a few voices? So there's one down here, and then is there another question? We can bounce straight onto that, and then we'll take them both together. Two right next to each other. That's very convenient. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Matt Edgar, and I've got a question about all of the projects that you're describing seem to be working really hard to bring a particular kind of creative people together and give them these amazing spaces to do their thing. You're all also doing that in the middle of big cities with big populations, and I just want to hear, do you have any examples or stories about what happens when your amazing creative cadre meet with the people who live around them, and whether there's real, genuine sort of iteration and engagement between the communities and the spaces that you've created?
Can I just take a second question? We'll do them together if you don't mind.
Sorry, I have a mild stammer, so it might be a bit laborious. I just have a question about how much you feel that the knowledge of the tech information for like programming and things like that is able to hold people back, and if you are able to move into these spaces not having that knowledge, and if not, what sort of knowledge would you have to know prior to making the move into that space?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah. So first of all, the gentleman in the green jumper. When we first opened TechHub Manchester in November, we ran a hackathon called Startup Weekend, which is part of the Global Entrepreneur Week. So there was 100 happening around the world, and whoever won was flown to Silicon Valley and invested in for millions alongside Silicon Valley comes to the UK. A gentleman called Sabod came on a Friday evening. There was 60 strangers got together, so 20 business guys, 20 developers and 20 designers, people who had ideas that had been itching, that they'd been wanting to create. And using Sabod as the case study, by Sunday evening he had a real business. He collaborated with a graphic designer from Salford University over the space of the weekend. I missed quite a bit. Like Salford University have come in and done our design work, and they've got Twitter handles on our walls so developers can reach out with designers. So that's another example. But Sabod in particular is now trialling his product with Barclays Bank. So a huge corporate's now trialling a piece of technology that's been created in the space of a weekend. And he's now got interest from the likes of Bank of America, and he's set to be a big success. And he's full-time now. He's given up his job, and he's very, very happy. So that would probably be that. And then to answer the second question to the gentleman about the tech thing, I get asked quite a lot from the business community, how do you engage with developers? And it's a difficult question, because one thing you have to remember with developers is it really is an art skill. They commit their whole lives to being world-class developers. And there's typically a disconnect of understanding from the business community of what it actually takes to make a website or a software application, and it for it to be not just working for yourself, but scalable for millions of people. So there's normally unrealistic expectations from the business side. But by the same token, I'm not going to say that developers are perfect. Some people have called developers modern day car mechanics, because they're very aware of your lack of understanding. So there's some naughty developers out there who overcharge because they understand that, and they get aggrieved at the fact that clients' expectations from business people like yourself are not in touch with reality. So to answer your question of how best to go about that, how to engage with the tech community, I think is what you're trying to ask. Or if you're thinking about setting up a tech business, my advice would be to come down to some of the events that we have at TechHub, which I should say are open for the whole of Manchester. The philosophy at TechHub is not to make money. I selfishly want to be around the very best people. So it's very much thinking about how Manchester can be a great destination, work backwards. Everything we do is in tune with that philosophy. And I'd start to speak with developers. I'd go to, for example, there's something called Business Bootstrap Club, which is a combination of business people and tech people. And I'd also come to, I'd look at websites such as Code Academy. The site I was referring to about Harvard, being a lad from Salford doing the same classes that kids in Harvard were doing, my mum thought I was just locked up in a room. She was a little bit worried about me. But, there are websites out there such as cs50.tv. HTML Dog is a good website just to start with if you want to learn the basics of a website. How do these things work? And I mean, it's a difficult one, because it really is. You could spend your whole life learning about computer science, right? So I'd suggest Code Academy and HTML Dog if you wanted to make a commitment of months. But I think your quickest thing to do would be to go to events and also a hackathon. Just because you'd have an experience of working with developers over a weekend, and after 54 hours of no sleep, they'd be quite frank with you and candid about their frustrations with the business community.
I can see one question there, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
So obviously we are a city centre lab, and we work across the city, but I wanted to say I don't think you can have a thriving ecology if you've got all the bits within you, because it would make you really lazy and siloed as a network. So I think it's totally great that we don't have an art gallery. Some days I really want one, but best not to have one, or a performance space, or all the technologists, because that makes me go down to the hack space and talk to them about what they're doing and find new connections. It makes me go and speak to the other galleries in the city and make those connections. So I think that kind of planning that diversity within the spaces that you set up and the networks you set up are really important, and that also means that you can kind of access communities in that same way. Norwest Media Centre is a totally brilliant organisation in Bristol working in an area of deprivation. Way better that they work with us to do the projects than we parachute in some meaningless mobile phone app. So I think it's all about like making sure you don't think you're the finite resource once you've made that kind of mini network.
Okay, thank you. I'm being told to wrap up, so if you could try and make this a comment. Sure. And moderator's tricks.
Loud comment. So it was just a kind of, it was a comment actually on the panel, so
thank you.
There seems to be sort of a characteristic of these sort of three different spaces, and to sort of loosely characterize them by, there's a kind of degree of openness, but there's quite, in all three spaces, there's a kind of selection process that you go through, and I was curious about what the criteria of that selection was, and also the kind of usual question, which would be, how do you measure success? And so a lot of people have talked about, don't keep the money at the margins, and money's not the kind of ambition here. So what is the ambition? So that's maybe a discussion for some other time.
I think that's a really nice one to take out to the cafe afterwards, don't you? That was a really good question, actually, which I think we will follow up. But we're going to have to wrap that there. I do want you guys to have a chance for a break before the next session. As I say, if you want to get a bit more engaged in discussions, there's a Serendipity Salon, there's an unconference, and we've got some great sessions starting after the break. Thank you very much.